This is not a story about a distant land or an ancient civilization. This is a tale born in the fractured, bleeding heart of the American dream itself, in its darkest and most forgotten corners. This is a story about chemistry and capitalism, about politics and all-consuming poverty, about a substance so cheap, powerful, and destructive that it would sweep through American cities like a wildfire through a dry California forest, leaving behind only scorched earth and charred destinies. This is the story of crack, a small off-white rock that broke America's back. The Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, a piece of legislation forged in the white-hot crucible of a nationwide moral panic. It became a weapon of mass destruction aimed not at a foreign enemy, but at its own citizens. It established the infamous, mathematically absurd sentencing ratio, 100 to 1. For the possession of 500 grams of powder cocaine, the drug of Wall Street white-collars, the fuel for Hollywood parties, the white dust on mirrored tables in Manhattan penthouses, the penalty was 5 years in federal prison, a mandatory minimum sentence. This was the weight of an expensive briefcase, the contents of a safe in an office overlooking Central Park. But to get that same sentence for crack, the drug of despair from the black ghettos, the fuel of hopelessness in crumbling housing projects, one only needed to possess 5 grams. 5 grams. The weight of 5 sugar packets that fit in the palm of your hand. An amount not for sale, an amount for personal use, for one desperate evening. 500 grams versus 5. 100 to 1. This was not a stenographer's error or a typo in the law. This was not an accident. It was a cold, cynical, calculated decision. The intentional creation of a legal weapon calibrated along racial lines with the precision of a sniper's scope. And that scope was aimed at the country's most vulnerable neighborhoods. As a result of this calculation, an entire generation of young black men would end up behind bars. Homicide rates in American cities would skyrocket, turning entire neighborhoods into war zones, where the sound of sirens became a lullaby and the flash of gunshots, the street lighting. The American justice system would mutate into a monstrous, insatiable machine of mass incarceration, unparalleled in the developed world. But this machine was selective in its choice of fuel. It demanded a specific raw material. Over 80% of all those sentenced under federal crack cocaine laws were black. This was despite the fact that, according to the government's own research, the majority of crack users were white. The justice system simply did not look in their direction. Its gaze, like the searchlight of a prison tower, was fixed firmly on the ghetto. This is not just a story about a drug. It is an autopsy, an anatomical theater where American society lies on the dissection table, and we, layer by layer, dissect how the weapons of social control are created and deployed. We will be studying not the chemistry of the substance, but the chemistry of fear. This is a tale of how fear, racism, and political cynicism merged into a poisonous cocktail to declare war not on a substance, but on its own citizens, labeled as other. And this war, having merely changed its tactics and its name, still continues today, its echoes heard in every sentence, in every prison cell. To understand this madness, this purposeful cruelty, we must go back, far back to the misty, rarefied heights of the Andes, where the story of this substance begins not with a crime, but with a divine ritual. Long before there was crack, there was cocaine, And long before cocaine got its name, it was simply a leaf. High in the Andes, at altitudes where the air grows thin as a blade and every step demands superhuman effort, the indigenous peoples of Peru and Bolivia for millennia chewed the leaves of a gnarled, unassuming shrub called Erythroxylum coca. They called it mama coca, the sacred leaf, a gift from the gods, the green blood of the mountains. It was not recreation, not a vice, and not an escape from reality. It was survival. It was the very fabric of their existence, woven into every aspect of life, from birth to death. The coca leaf, brewed into a tea or simply chewed in a wad with a small amount of lime, provided a mild yet tangible stimulating effect. It suppressed the agonizing pangs of hunger, combated debilitating altitude sickness, and, most importantly, allowed laborers to endure brutal, exhausting work in the oxygen-starved conditions of the high plateaus. It was the fuel of a civilization built among the clouds, but its true purpose was far more profound than mere physical endurance. Archaeological findings indicate that coca cultivation dates back at least 8,000 years. Ancient mummies found on the arid coast of Peru have been discovered with wads of coca leaves still tucked in their cheeks, an eternal testament preserved for millennia by the dry desert air. Ceramic vessels shaped like coca leaves, ritual offerings, and intricately made pouches for carrying the precious substance have been found at pre-Columbian sites throughout the Andes. For the Inca Empire, which dominated the region from the 13th to the 16th century, coca was much more than just a stimulant. It was a gift from Inti, the sun god himself, a sacrament connecting the earthly world with the divine. Its use was strictly regulated by the priestly caste and the emperor himself, the Sapa Inca. Coca was the bridge between the world of humans and the world of spirits. Commoners were generally forbidden from chewing coca, except during certain religious festivals or when performing particularly arduous labor for the state. The nobility, by contrast, could use it freely. It was a marker of status, a symbol of power, and an integral component of religious rituals. Priests would blow coca smoke towards the sun, make offerings of leaves to the sacred mountains, and divine the future by reading the patterns of scattered leaves. The sacred leaf was currency, medicine, and prayer all at once. But this fragile harmony was doomed. When the Spanish conquistadors, led by the ruthless Francisco Pizarro, arrived in the 16th century, they initially regarded the practice with contempt, considering it a primitive superstition, even devil worship. The Catholic Church seriously debated whether to ban coca entirely as a pagan practice, but the Spanish quickly realized something more important than theological purity: utility. The conquistadors discovered unimaginable riches in the mountains of Peru and Bolivia. The silver mines of Potosi in modern-day Bolivia were some of the richest deposits ever found by humankind. The mountain from which the silver was extracted was so rich that it was called the mountain that eats men. And this was true, literally and terrifyingly so. The Potosi mines were death traps, an antechamber to hell on earth. Indigenous laborers, forcibly conscripted into the Mita system of compulsory labor, descended into narrow, airless shafts hewn deep into the mountain. They worked in near-total darkness, lit only by sputtering tallow candles, inhaling toxic mercury and arsenic dust, hauling heavy baskets of ore on their backs up crude ladders made of rawhide during shifts that could last 12 hours or more. It was slavery in its most inhuman form. The altitude in Potosi is over 4,000 meters. The air here is so thin that every movement requires superhuman effort, every breath a struggle. The work was grueling and deadly. Thousands upon thousands of indigenous laborers perished in these mines, their bodies thrown into mass graves or simply left to decompose in abandoned shafts. The mountain of Potosi devoured men, and the Spanish discovered that workers who chewed coca could labor longer, harder, and with fewer complaints. Coca suppressed their hunger, allowing the Spanish to reduce their already meager food rations. It gave them energy in the thin mountain air. It dulled their awareness of their own inhuman suffering, turning them into more resilient and submissive slaves. Therefore, the Spanish, despite the reservations of the church, began to cultivate coca on an industrial scale. They turned a gift from the gods into an instrument of genocide. They established vast plantations in the warm Yungas valleys east of the Andes, where the coca shrub thrived in the humid subtropical climate. They distributed coca leaves as part of the workers' wages, creating a vicious cycle of dependency. The sacred leaf of the Incas became an instrument of colonial exploitation, the fuel that fed the insatiable machine of the Spanish Empire. But even then, in the hands of cruel conquerors, the leaf remained just a leaf. Its true dark potential still lay dormant, locked within its plant cells. Silver from Potosi flowed to Europe on Spanish galleons, financing wars, building lavish cathedrals, and enriching the crown. And coca, the humble leaf that made it all possible, remained a footnote in history, a regional curiosity briefly mentioned in the chronicles of conquistadors and missionaries. It was waiting for its moment to enter the world stage, and this entrance proved to be far more destructive than anyone could have imagined. But for that, a new kind of alchemy was required, a new type of priest. For 3 centuries, coca remained confined to South America, known to European botanists, but not used by them. It was described in scientific texts, its dried specimens kept in cabinets of curiosities, but it held little interest for the wider world. Europe had its own stimulants: coffee, tea, tobacco. The coca leaf was simply too distant, too exotic, and too foreign to gain popularity. Then came the chemists. The 19th century was the age of chemistry, an era when scientists across Europe competed to isolate, purify, and understand the active principles of plants that had been used in medicine for centuries. Morphine was isolated from opium in 1804. Quinine from the bark of the cinchona tree in 1820. These discoveries were not mere academic exercises. They transformed medicine and created fabulous fortunes for the pharmaceutical companies that could synthesize and sell these compounds. In 1855, a German graduate student named Friedrich Gaedke, working in his laboratory at the University of Göttingen, succeeded in isolating the primary active alkaloid from the coca leaf. It was painstaking, tedious work. He ground the dried leaves into a fine powder, extracted them with alcohol, and subjected the resulting solution to a series of complex chemical manipulations. What he obtained was crude and impure, but it was a beginning. He named the substance erythroxyline, after the plant's scientific name. For Gaedke, it was an academic achievement, a successful dissertation project. He had no idea of the consequences his discovery would entail. He published his findings in an obscure scientific journal where they were noticed by a few specialists and then largely forgotten. 4 years later, another German chemist, Albert Niemann, a doctoral candidate working under the famous Friedrich Wöhler at the same University of Göttingen, returned to Gaedke's work. Niemann was more meticulous, more ambitious. He refined the process, experimenting with different extraction methods and purification techniques. After months of trial and error, in his poorly lit laboratory, smelling of ether and acids, he succeeded in obtaining a pure crystalline powder. Fine, silky white crystals that dissolved easily in water and had a strange, numbing effect when applied to the tongue. He presented his findings as his doctoral dissertation in 1860 and gave this new alkaloid a name that would echo through history: cocaine. Niemann's description of the substance was clinical, scientific, and chillingly prophetic. He noted its bitter taste, its crystalline structure, and, most importantly, its pharmacological effects. When he applied a small amount to his tongue, it caused an immediate numbness, a complete loss of sensation that lasted for several minutes. This was the first hint of cocaine's potential as a local anesthetic, an application that would not be fully realized for another 2 decades. Niemann also noted, almost in passing, that the substance produced a feeling of mild euphoria and increased energy when consumed in larger doses. He was describing in dry academic language the fundamental properties that would make cocaine one of the most sought-after and destructive substances in history. But he would never see what his creation would become. His discovery was like forging the key to Pandora's box, which he left lying on the lab bench. Niemann did not live to see what he had created. He died the following year, in 1861, at the age of just 26, likely from a lung ailment contracted in the laboratory from inhaling toxic chemical fumes. His discovery, like Gaedke's before it, remained in obscurity for nearly 2 decades. The pure white powder was a chemical curiosity, a compound catalogued in reference books, and occasionally prepared in small batches for laboratory research, but with no clear practical application. The genie was locked in the bottle, waiting for someone to open it, and that person would soon appear. Only in the 1880s would a confluence of circumstances, medical experiments, pharmaceutical entrepreneurship, and cultural enthusiasm, suddenly bring cocaine into the spotlight. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: ophthalmology. Eye surgery in the 19th century was a terrifying, barbaric spectacle. Patients had to be held down by force or strapped down while surgeons worked on the most delicate structures of the eye. The pain was excruciating and often led to shock. In 1884, a young Viennese ophthalmologist named Karl Koller, a colleague and friend of Sigmund Freud, was searching for a local anesthetic that could be applied directly to the eye. Freud, who at the time was actively experimenting with cocaine himself, shared some of the substance with Koller. On a hunch, Koller tried applying a cocaine solution to a frog's eye. The anesthetic effect was immediate and complete. The frog's eye became completely insensitive to touch. Excited, Koller tried it on himself, on his colleagues, and then on patients. It worked perfectly. For the first time in history, it was possible to perform eye surgery on a fully conscious patient without the slightest pain. Koller presented his findings at a medical conference in Heidelberg in September 1884, and the reaction was explosive. Within months, surgeons around the world were using cocaine as a local anesthetic. It was a true medical breakthrough. But the world did not yet know that this breakthrough would open Pandora's box, unleashing something uncontrollable. Then, in the 1880s, a wave of unbridled medical enthusiasm swept across Europe and America. Doctors and researchers, convinced they had discovered a miracle drug, began to experiment with cocaine's potential. One of its most ardent and influential proponents was a young, ambitious Viennese neurologist named Sigmund Freud. In 1884, Freud was 28 years old. Brilliant but professionally frustrated, he was an unpaid lecturer at the University of Vienna, barely making ends meet, desperate for a breakthrough discovery that would make his name and allow him to marry his fiancée, Martha Bernays. Freud had read everything available about cocaine. He knew about Koller's anesthetic experiments. He was particularly intrigued by reports from American military doctors who observed that soldiers given coca preparations could march long distances without fatigue or hunger. Freud began to experiment on himself, ordering pharmaceutical cocaine hydrochloride from the German company Merck. Trying it for the first time, he experienced an effect like a revelation. He felt energetic, confident, even brilliant. The chronic depression and self-doubt that plagued him dissipated like a morning mist. He felt capable of great deeds, of solving problems that only an hour before had seemed insurmountable. He believed he had found the key not only to fame, but to the mysteries of the human mind. This was not just scientific curiosity, it was personal salvation. Freud became an evangelist for the drug. He wrote enthusiastically to Martha, describing cocaine as a magical substance that made him strong and capable. He sent her small doses, urging her to try it for her own ailments. He gave it to his sisters, he prescribed it to patients, and, most importantly, he began to write about it with an enthusiasm that would later deeply embarrass him and become a dark stain on his reputation. In July 1884, Freud published his first major work on cocaine, titled Über Coca, on coca. It was part medical treatise, part promotional literature, and entirely an overly enthusiastic text. In it, Freud, with the zeal of a new convert, enumerated the supposed virtues of cocaine. He recommended it for treating depression, calling it the most effective remedy for melancholia. He prescribed it for digestive disorders, asthma, syphilis, and alcoholism. He recklessly claimed that cocaine could cure morphine addiction, allowing addicts to painlessly withdraw from opiates by substituting them with cocaine. He suggested that cocaine could enhance physical performance, making workers more productive and soldiers more effective. He even recommended it as an aphrodisiac. The paper was widely read and translated. Freud's reputation was made. But the dark side of cocaine's nature was already beginning to emerge, and Freud's own circle would provide the first tragic proof. One of Freud's closest friends and colleagues was a distinguished physician named Ernst von Fleischl-Marxow. Fleischl was a brilliant researcher, a rising star in Viennese medicine, but he was also a man suffering from constant excruciating pain. Years earlier, during an autopsy, he had accidentally cut his thumb with an infected scalpel. The infection spread to the bone, and despite numerous surgeries, the pain never subsided. To cope with it, Fleischl was prescribed morphine. By the time Freud knew him, Fleischl was a severe morphine addict, injecting massive doses just to maintain a basic level of functioning. Freud, armed with his newfound wonder drug and convinced of its ability to cure morphine addiction, prescribed cocaine to Fleischl. The logic seemed flawless. Replace one drug with another, non-addictive substance, and then gradually taper off the dose. Fleischl, desperate to be free of both his pain and his morphine addiction, eagerly accepted the treatment. He began taking cocaine, first orally, then by injection. The effect was immediate and seemed miraculous. His craving for morphine subsided. He felt energetic, clear-headed, almost healthy. Freud was triumphant, convinced he had saved his friend's life and made a medical breakthrough. He was certain he was on the threshold of fame, but he was standing on the edge of an abyss. Within months, the situation deteriorated catastrophically. Fleischl, instead of tapering off the cocaine, began taking larger and larger doses. Soon, he was injecting a full gram of cocaine a day, an absolutely staggering, lethal amount. The drug, rather than freeing him from his addiction, had trapped him in something far worse. He had traded one prison for another, more terrifying one. Fleischl developed what we would now call a full-blown cocaine psychosis. He experienced terrifying hallucinations, white snakes crawling on his skin, voices whispering threats, dark figures stalking him through the streets of Vienna. He became paranoid, convinced that plots were being hatched against him. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating. His physical health collapsed. His hands trembled constantly. His brilliant mind, once one of the finest in Vienna, fragmented under the drug's assault. Freud watched in horror as his friend fell apart. Fleischl's condition became so severe that Freud and other colleagues had to take turns sitting with him through the night, holding him down during the worst of his fits, desperately trying to soothe his paranoid delusions. Despite all their efforts, Fleischl never recovered. He died in 1891, his body and mind utterly destroyed. He was only 45 years old. He became the first widely known victim of cocaine in the modern era, living and dying proof of the substance's monstrous power. The tragedy of Fleischl-Marxow deeply shook Freud. He quietly stopped recommending cocaine for the treatment of morphine addiction. His later writings on the subject became far more cautious, even critical. He privately expressed a profound sense of guilt for his role in his friend's demise. But he never fully renounced his early work, and by then the damage had been done. Freud's endorsement, published in medical journals and widely cited, had given cocaine an aura of scientific legitimacy, unleashing a monster upon the world. By the 1880s and 1890s, cocaine burst into mainstream Western culture with a speed and enthusiasm that is almost impossible to imagine today. It was everywhere, sold with the kind of brazen confidence that only an unregulated industry could afford. This was the golden age of patent medicines, when anyone with a laboratory and a printing press could manufacture cures and make grandiose claims about their benefits. There were no controls, no clinical trials, no requirements to prove safety or efficacy. Pharmaceutical companies produced cocaine lozenges for sore throats, cocaine tablets for indigestion, cocaine cigarettes for asthma, cocaine nasal sprays for hay fever, and cocaine drops for children's toothaches. Parker Davis, one of America's largest and most respected pharmaceutical firms, was a leading global manufacturer of cocaine products. Their catalog was staggering in its scope. It was not just a list of products, it was a manifesto for a new age of chemical self-improvement. The company's advertisements promised that cocaine will replace food, make the coward brave, the silent eloquent, and render the sufferer insensitive to pain. They sold a portable cocaine injection kit, complete with a syringe, needles, and a carrying case, marketed as perfect for the traveling professional. One particularly chilling product was aimed at children: cocaine drops sold to parents for teething pain and colic. Exhausted mothers, whose infants cried inconsolably, would administer a few drops of the cocaine solution. The baby would instantly quiet down, subdued by the drug, and the mother would believe she had found a miracle cure. But the most famous product of the era, the one that would embed cocaine into American cultural memory forever, was not even sold as a medicine. It was a soft drink. In 1886, a pharmacist and former Confederate colonel named John Pemberton was working in his laboratory in Atlanta, Georgia. Pemberton himself was a morphine addict, having become hooked on the drug after treating painful wounds sustained during the Civil War. He was searching for a cure for his addiction and, after reading glowing reports about cocaine, began to experiment. He created a syrupy brown liquid from an extract of coca leaves, an extract of the cola nut, which provided caffeine, sugar, and a blend of secret flavorings. He mixed it with carbonated water, creating what he called a brain tonic and intellectual beverage. Pemberton's business partner, Frank Robinson, suggested the name Coca-Cola. The drink began selling at soda fountains in Atlanta from May 1886, priced at 5 cents a glass. The advertising was aggressive and grandiose. Coca-Cola was promoted as a cure for headaches, exhaustion, and nervous disorders. It was delicious, refreshing, exhilarating, invigorating, and it was. The original Coca-Cola formula contained approximately 9 milligrams of cocaine per glass. Regular consumers received a mild but noticeable stimulating effect. Americans loved it. They weren't just drinking a beverage, they were consuming the idea of progress and vitality in a bottle. Sales grew exponentially. By 1891, Coca-Cola was being sold in every state of the Union. Pemberton himself did not live to see his creation become a global phenomenon. He died in 1888, penniless and still addicted to morphine. The rights to Coca-Cola were eventually consolidated in the hands of a brilliant businessman named Asa Griggs Candler, who turned the drink into a marketing behemoth. Cocaine, however, was becoming a problem. As public opinion turned against the drug, Coca-Cola came under scrutiny. In 1903, under growing pressure, the company quietly changed its recipe, removing the active cocaine. The cocaine was gone, but the name remained, a monument to an age of innocence that was coming to a brutal end. The golden age of cocaine was short-lived. The same properties that made it exhilarating also made it dangerous. Doctors began to notice patterns, cravings, rising tolerance, crushing depression upon withdrawal. The miracle drug was addictive, but the turn in public opinion was not just medical, it was deeply, fundamentally racial. By the early 1900s, cocaine use had spread into the black communities of the South. Southern newspapers began to publish lurid, sensational stories about what they called the Negro cocaine fiend. These stories, almost entirely fabricated, played on the deepest racist fears of white America. They claimed that cocaine turned black men into violent, superhuman monsters who assaulted white women, resisted arrest with inhuman strength, and could only be stopped by multiple gunshots. This wasn't just exaggeration, it was the creation of a mythological enemy. One infamous article in the New York Times in 1914 claimed that cocaine-crazed Negroes were raping white women across the South, and that police, .32 caliber revolvers, were insufficient to stop them. They needed .38 caliber weapons to penetrate the bulletproof skin induced by cocaine. This was pseudoscience masquerading as journalism, racist propaganda designed to incite white terror and justify violence. This racist moral panic became the main driving force behind America's first major federal drug law. The Harrison Narcotics Tax Act, passed in 1914, was ostensibly a tax and regulation measure, but in practice it was interpreted and enforced as total prohibition. Within a few years, cocaine was effectively criminalized and its legal market collapsed. The demand didn't disappear. It simply went underground, creating a black market. The Harrison Act set the template for American drug policy for a century to come. Criminalization, prohibition, and the use of criminal law to control substances and people. It enshrined in federal law a double standard that persists to this day. Drugs associated with white, affluent users were treated with leniency. Drugs associated with poor and communities of color were criminalized ruthlessly. And this ruthlessness would give birth to a monster that would dwarf everything that came before it. The resurgence of cocaine began quietly in the 1960s and exploded in the 1970s. The old puritanical horror of drugs was waning among the young and affluent. Cocaine, unlike heroin with its associations of destitution, had glamour. It was Studio 54 in Manhattan, where Andy Warhol and Mick Jagger danced in a haze of cocaine and champagne. It was 1980s Wall Street, where young traders used cocaine to power through 80-hour work weeks. Cocaine was the drug of winners, a symbol of excess and success. But beneath this glamorous surface, a massive criminal infrastructure was being built. The supply chain that fed America's appetite for cocaine was a marvel of criminal entrepreneurship, and it was centered in South America, primarily in Colombia. By the mid-1970s, Colombian traffickers had industrialized the process. This consolidation created immense wealth and power, and it gave birth to the most infamous criminal organization of the 20th century, the Medellin cartel. At the head of the cartel was Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria, a man whose life story reads like grim fiction. Born into poverty, Escobar entered the cocaine business and quickly grasped the scale of the opportunity. Demand in the United States was exploding. The profit margins were astronomical. A kilogram of cocaine that cost $1,000 in Colombia could be sold in Miami for $50,000 or more. Escobar didn't just see an opportunity, he saw a path to building an empire. By the late 1970s, the Medellin cartel had turned the cocaine trade into an industrial-scale operation. They weren't street corner dealers. They were the CEOs of a multinational corporation. They owned fleets of airplanes and submarines. At the height of their power in the early 1980s, the cartel was estimated to be smuggling 15 tons of cocaine into the United States every day. 15 tons every day. It was a torrent of white powder that became a torrent of cash that flooded South Florida. The profits were beyond comprehension. Pablo Escobar personally became one of the richest men on earth, with a fortune estimated at $25 billion. He built estates with private zoos filled with hippos and elephants. He buried barrels of cash in the ground because he couldn't launder it fast enough. He once burned $2 million in cash to keep his family warm while they were hiding in the mountains. Money lost all meaning to him, becoming just a score in a game he was playing against the world. But Escobar was not just a businessman, he was a terrorist. He waged war against the Colombian state, murdering judges, politicians, journalists, and police officers. He blew up a commercial airliner, killing 110 people in an attempt to eliminate a single political rival. His philosophy was simple and brutal: plata o plomo, silver or lead. Take his bribe or die. The cartel seemed untouchable, having built an empire on white powder and blood. But this empire had one fundamental business problem. The problem with powder cocaine, from a business perspective, was its expense. A gram of pure cocaine in the early 1980s could cost $100 or more. At that price, cocaine was accessible only to a narrow segment of the population. The working class and the poor were priced out of the market. The cartels and their American distributors were sitting on vast stockpiles of cocaine, but the market was saturated. The price per gram was slowly declining. The drug traffickers needed a new market. They needed to democratize cocaine. They needed crack. The innovation that created crack cocaine was not the work of a single genius. It emerged organically from the street-level drug trade. The chemistry had been known for decades. Cocaine hydrochloride, the white powder, is a salt that cannot be smoked effectively. The solution was to convert the salt back into its freebase form. The process turned out to be devastatingly simple, one that could be performed in any kitchen with baking soda. The powder cocaine was dissolved in water, baking soda was added, and the mixture was gently heated. As the mixture cooled, the cocaine would solidify into small off-white rocks. These rocks could be smoked. The process was called cooking up crack, and the name crack itself came from the crackling sound the rocks make when heated in a pipe. The rocks were small and sold for as little as $5 to $20 apiece. For the first time in history, cocaine was affordable for anyone. A homeless person begging for change could afford it, but crack wasn't just cheaper. It was immeasurably more powerful in its effect. When you snort powder, the high builds slowly like a sunrise, taking several minutes. When you smoke crack, the cocaine vapor is instantly absorbed through the vast surface area of the lungs and reaches the brain in seconds, faster than intravenous injection. The effect is immediate and overwhelming. Users describe the rush as one of the most intense pleasures a human can experience. It is an instantaneous flood of dopamine, producing a feeling of euphoria, invincibility, godlike power. All the pain, all the anxiety, all the misery and humiliation of life vanishes in a blinding flash. For those 5 to 10 seconds, they are perfect. But the come-down is as brutal as the high. Within minutes, the euphoria is replaced by a profound dysphoria, a crushing anxiety, an acute paranoia, and an immediate, desperate, all-consuming craving for another hit. This is the trap. The intensity of the high combined with the speed and severity of the come-down creates a cycle of compulsive redosing that is extraordinarily difficult to break. Users will smoke crack in marathon binges lasting hours or even days, chasing that first transcendent rush that can never be fully recaptured. The brain, battered by repeated floods of dopamine, begins to malfunction. Eventually, nothing brings pleasure but the drug. The transformation of crack from a niche drug into a national crisis was driven by economics. In the early 1980s, the cocaine market was oversaturated. Cartels were sitting on mountains of product, the price of which was falling. Crack became a marketing breakthrough. Any street-level dealer could turn the powder into crack and multiply their profits. The markup was astronomical. The market exploded. They needed their own McDonald's, a product available to everyone, on every corner. And they got it. The drug first appeared in Los Angeles around 1981-1982. The epicenter was the housing projects of South Central, which were already suffering from poverty, unemployment, and gang violence inherited from decades of systemic discrimination. The arrival of crack turned these neighborhoods into war zones, but crack didn't appear spontaneously. It was introduced, promoted, and distributed by a man who became the symbol of the crack trade in Los Angeles, Ricky Donnell Ross, known as Freeway Rick. Ross grew up in South Central. A talented tennis player, he lost a college scholarship when it was discovered he couldn't read. Another victim of a failed education system. Broke and desperate, Ross turned to drug dealing. When crack appeared, he immediately recognized its potential. He thought like a businessman, building a distribution network that spanned the city and, eventually, the country. At his peak in the mid-1980s, Ross claimed to be selling $3 million worth of crack a day. But Ross's story is also the story of something darker and more sinister. Ross's supplier, the man who provided him with a nearly unlimited supply of cocaine at rock-bottom prices, was a Nicaraguan expatriate named Oscar Danilo Blandon Reyes. Blandon was not just a drug trafficker. He was a political operative with deep ties to the Contras, the right-wing rebel group fighting against the socialist Sandinista government in Nicaragua. The Reagan administration was obsessed with stopping communism in Central America, but Congress, fearing another Vietnam, had forbidden direct funding of the Contras. The CIA was looking for alternative revenue streams for its covert wars. The question that would haunt American politics for years was this: did the CIA know about Blandon's activities? Did it facilitate them? Did it actively protect Contra-connected drug traffickers from prosecution by the Drug Enforcement Administration? The evidence is circumstantial but damning. DEA agents reported that their investigations leading to Contra-connected figures were inexplicably shut down from above. Pilots who flew weapons to the Contras in Central America testified that their planes were loaded with cocaine for the return trip. In 1996, investigative journalist Gary Webb published a series of articles in the San Jose Mercury News titled Dark Alliance. It alleged that the CIA had knowingly facilitated the flow of cocaine into south-central Los Angeles to fund the Contras, and that this influx of cheap cocaine directly sparked the crack epidemic. The story was explosive. It suggested that the epidemic that devastated black communities was allowed, if not engineered, by the U.S. government itself. Major newspapers such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times fiercely attacked Webb's reporting, pointing out flaws and exaggerations in his conclusions. But the essence of his reporting was correct. Contra supporters were importing tons of cocaine into the U.S., and the CIA knew about it and, at the very least, turned a blind eye. The scandal destroyed Webb's career. In 2004, he was found dead with 2 gunshot wounds to the head. The death was officially ruled a suicide. Later, an internal CIA investigation confirmed many of Webb's main allegations, but by then, the damage had been done, and the truth was buried under an avalanche of denials. Meanwhile, crack was spreading at a terrifying speed. By 1986, it was everywhere. In New York, crack arrived with a particular fury. The South Bronx, already devastated by fires and Capitol flight in the 70s, looked like a bombed-out war zone. Harlem was devastated. Crack houses spread like a cancer through the body of the city. These were scenes of pure human degradation, a Dantean hell made real on Earth. A typical crack house is an abandoned building, gutted and desecrated. The air is thick with the acrid chemical smell of burning crack and the stench of human waste. The bare floors are littered with empty glass vials, broken pipes, trash. In the back rooms, by the light of a single bare bulb or the flame of a lighter, people smoke crack in a stupor, locked in their desperate, repetitive cycles. Their faces are masks of desperation, eyes vacant or filled with paranoid fear. A person would enter with $20. They would buy 2 rocks, smoke them, experience a brief euphoria, followed by a crushing come-down. Then, unable to leave, they would do anything to get more money. Sell their shoes, their jacket, steal, offer sex. Some stayed in the crack houses for days, not eating, not sleeping, until they collapsed from exhaustion. People lost 30 kilograms during binges. Teeth rotted and fell out. Hair fell out. Open sores appeared on their faces and arms from compulsive scratching caused by tactile hallucinations, the feeling of insects crawling under the skin. The violence that accompanied crack was chaotic, sudden, and brutal. Territory wars erupted between gangs. Young men, teenagers, armed themselves with semi-automatic pistols and machine guns. Drive-by shootings became routine. The collateral damage was staggering. Innocent children playing on their front porches were killed. In every major city, the murder rate soared. Washington earned the nickname the murder capital. Entire neighborhoods lived under siege. The sense of hopelessness was pervasive. The term crack baby entered the lexicon in the mid-1980s. The media and public officials told a terrifying story of pregnant addicts giving birth to irreversibly damaged, doomed children. They were called a lost generation, a biological underclass. The image of the crack mother was almost always that of a black woman, portrayed as irresponsible and criminally negligent. This narrative justified taking children away and prosecuting mothers, but the science behind this panic was flawed. Later, long-term studies showed that the initial findings were greatly exaggerated. Children exposed to crack in utero faced challenges, but they were not doomed. But the damage was done. A whole generation of children was stigmatized and their mothers were demonized. The American government's response to the crack epidemic was not treatment, but incarceration. In 1986, Congress, in a panic, passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. The immediate trigger was the death of rising basketball star Len Bias from a cocaine overdose. The media incorrectly reported that he had smoked crack, sparking a wave of moral panic. The law established draconian mandatory minimum sentences and the infamous 100-to-1 sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine. 5 grams of crack, 5 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. 500 grams of powder, the same 5 years. The disparity was not accidental. Crack was associated with poor black users, powder with affluent white ones. The law created a system in which black Americans caught with a small amount of crack for personal use received longer sentences than white dealers caught with a huge amount of powder. It was the mathematics of racism, enshrined in law. The result was catastrophic. Tens of thousands of black men and women, often small-time dealers or simply users, received sentences longer than those for murderers and rapists. Prisons overflowed. The U.S. suddenly had the highest incarceration rate in the world, surpassing even the most repressive regimes. Meanwhile, white college students caught with powder cocaine in their dorms got off with probation. The war on drugs became a war on black communities. Police adopted aggressive stop-and-frisk tactics, targeting young black and Latino men. Families were torn apart. A young man arrested for selling $50 worth of crack could disappear into the prison system for a decade. His children grew up without a father. When he was released, he faced a world that had permanently branded him a felon. He was denied public housing, food stamps, student loans, and jobs. The system didn't just punish. It created a permanent underclass, trapped in a vicious cycle of poverty and prison. By the mid-1990s, the crack epidemic began to recede. The horror of its consequences, an aging generation of users, and harsh police actions all played a role. The drug lost its appeal, becoming a symbol of destruction and despair. But it never truly went away. It just became less visible, receding into the shadows, into the most marginalized corners of society. America stopped paying attention, moving on to new drug crises. The legacy of the crack era is mass incarceration, devastated communities, and a deep, unhealed distrust between Black Americans and the authorities. The draconian laws were reformed only partially and far too late. In 2010, the Fair Sentencing Act reduced the disparity from 100.1 to 18.1. It was progress, but not justice. Thousands of people remained in prison, serving unjust sentences under laws that were now acknowledged as discriminatory. The crack epidemic exposed the profound hypocrisy of American drug policy. When crack devastated Black communities, the response was punishment, prisons, and demonization. When, decades later, opioids and fentanyl began to devastate predominantly white rural and suburban communities, the response became treatment, compassion, and the recognition of addiction as a disease. It revealed an uncomfortable, brutal truth about which lives America valued and which it was willing to write off. The small white rock that broke America was not an accident. It was the inevitable result of decades of political failures, an economic system that abandoned entire communities, and a justice system that always chose punishment over compassion. Crack was not the moral failing of individuals. It was a systemic, political, and economic failure, a failure of imagination and empathy on a national scale. The lessons of crack echo in our current drug crisis. The opioid epidemic follows a similar pattern, but the response to it is markedly different. Opioid users, predominantly white, are seen as victims deserving of treatment, not as criminals. This is progress, but it only highlights the racial double standard that defined the crack era. It is a belated compassion that was never offered to those who needed it 30 years ago. The small white rock broke America not because it was uniquely evil, but because America was already broken. Crack simply exposed the fissures that were always there: inequality, racism, the abandonment of the vulnerable, the worship of punishment over redemption. And until we fix these fissures, until we repair what was broken, the story of crack cocaine will not be history. It will be a prologue. The next epidemic is always waiting in the wings. And without fundamental changes, without recognizing that addiction is a disease, not a crime, we will respond to it with the same failed policies, the same blind spots, the same willingness to sacrifice the most vulnerable among us. The choice, as always, is ours.